Hi everyone. Today we're going to look at the story of a guy called Abram. We're going to see how God called him and how he obeyed God's call. Abram and his brothers Nahor and Haran were born in a place called which is now part of southern Iraq. All the brothers got married and had children except Abram. Sarai, Abram's wife, was not able to have children, and this made Abram and Sarai very sad. While they were living in sadly, Haran died. So Terah, Abram's dad, decided it was time to move on. He took Abram and Sarah and Abram's nephew Lot, Haran's son, with him. They moved to a place that was also called Haran, the same name as Abram's brother. Haran is in what we now know as Turkey. Abram was very successful in Haran and amassed quite a lot of wealth and livestock. He lived there until he was 75, until one day God spoke to Abram. He told him to leave his family and his country, to leave his father, and to go to a far-off land that the Lord would show him. God promised Abram that he would make him famous and make him the father of a great nation, and that everyone on earth would be blessed through him. This surprised Abram a lot, as he was already 75 and Sarah was already 65, and they could not have children together. But Abram trusted God and did what he said. He packed all his stuff, all his money, got all the people who lived with him and worked for him together, along with the animals, and they left his family, his father, and his homeland. But he did take his nephew Lot with him. They travelled a long way. Eventually they came to the land of Canaan. They continued through Canaan until they came to a place called Shechem, where they settled and set up camp. Not surprisingly, the land was inhabited by Canaanites, so Abram and his household did not build any houses. They didn't build a big town, but they continued to live in tents. This was because there were foreigners in the land. They were only there because God told Abram to go there, and they were living there because of Abram's faith in God. Once they were settled, God once again spoke to Abram and repeated his promise. God told him that this was the land that his descendants would inherit. But you see, the land had not been given to Abram yet. It was for his descendants, not for him, and their inheritance was in God's time. But Abram and Sarah still had no kids. Sarah and Abram continued to believe in and trust in God. And because of their faith, when God chose, Sarah had a baby. She was 90 years old and Abram was 100. They could not have had a baby without God's help. They called their son Isaac, and in time, Isaac had a son who he called Jacob. They continued to live in Canaan and continued to live in tents because they were still living as aliens in the land. This land still had not been given to them yet. They understood that they were foreigners, but by faith they were looking forward to the time that God would fulfill his promises. Abram's grandson Jacob, who would later be called Israel, had 12 sons, and these 12 sons would be the 12 tribes of Israel. We probably all know the story of Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, and his dreams, and how, after being sold into slavery in Egypt, God raised him up and put him in charge of all of Egypt, and how he brought his family, all his brothers, their wives, his mum and dad, and everyone in their household to Egypt to escape from famine. And over the past few weeks, we've seen how after a few hundred years, God multiplied the Israelites while they were in Egypt, and how God rescued them and led them to the promised land. And so, a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead, as the Bible says. A nation with so many people that, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, there was no way to count them. And that promise still holds good for us today. Through Jesus, we have become part of that promise to bless the whole earth, and the promise that God will give us a land to call our own. Abram, Isaac, and Jacob did not live to see God give their descendants their homeland, but they trusted and looked forward to the time that this would happen. Just as we look forward to the time when we will inherit our heavenly homeland. But until that day, we live by faith as foreigners on this earth. Thank you.